Welcome, everybody. I'm Laura Flanders. The United Nations defines violence against women as any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or mental harm or suffering to women in public or in private life. They further estimate that over a quarter of all women aged 15 to 49 who have ever been in a relationship have been subjected to some form of gender-based violence. This series of roundtables hosted with the Carter Center is calling for a new global treaty to curb this sort of violence. Each session is featuring a different theme, and in this one, we are focusing on the climate crisis. Environmental disaster, resource wars, and dislocation have catastrophic effects for everyone, but specific impacts on women and girls, consequences that are often overlooked even as they lie right there before us in plain sight. Consider just one report released recently by Oxfam looking at the Horn of Africa. Oxfam estimates that one person is dying of hunger every 48 seconds from a drought made worse by war and climate change. With food, grain, herds, and human health now teetering on the brink, children, pregnant mothers, and the elderly are dying first. But what about the living? The crisis is also exacerbating existing violence by partners and non-partners alike and leading to new forms of gender-based violence. And that's just one part of our planet right now. Today, we are going to look at this situation more closely and make the case for comprehensive, decisive international action in the form of a treaty to stop violence against women. The panelists who are joining us today are experts and frontline activists with years of experience, not just addressing and describing the problem, but helping women, and especially women and girls, to confront it. Simi, Kamal has close to 4 decades working at the intersections of climate change, environment, water justice, food sovereignty, and women's empowerment in Pakistan. She served on the National Commission on the Status of Women there and authored the country's Gender Reform Action Plan. Simi joined Every Woman's Working Group in 2014. Lipi, Rahman looks at especially vulnerable women and their access to and control of land and bodies of water. Her organization, Badabon Sangho, works with women, particularly women experiencing disproportionate vulnerability, as they fight for access to property and water and for migrant workers' rights. She's joining us from Bangladesh. Amanda Arroyo-Cabezas works at the intersection of climate justice and women's empowerment too. She works especially with a focus on empowerment through entrepreneurship. She's worked with the United Nations and other social and environmental organizations in topics such as gender, diversity, human rights, public policy, youth, and climate change. She is the program manager of Nosotras Women Connecting, a global community of women building a new way to do business and lead. And I just want to thank all of you for joining us today for this critically important conversation and remind our audience that there will be an opportunity for your questions to be answered by our panelists at the end of this hour. So feel free to contribute your questions to the portal we're using today. I'd like to start, because we are so often in these rooms, dislocated but talking, with having you each just tell us a little bit about where you're joining us from. And I know we've brought you from whatever else you were doing in your life and your different times of your day. What is foremost on your mind as you join us in this moment? Let's start with you, Simi Kamal. And we'll need to bring up your microphone.
Hi. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm speaking to you from Karachi, the southern part of Pakistan, where we are currently experiencing a horrific heat wave. And this is the second year running that we have that. And that's pointing towards what is more to come. A lot of what we expected would happen another decade or two from now is already happening. So when I come here, I'm thinking with all these huge changes that I'm personally experiencing today, and all of you are as well, what does that mean for gender-based violence? Does it mean it'll get worse? If it gets worse, Are we ready for it? I'm afraid we are not. I'll
Mm.
stop there for now.
Thank you. And what about you, Lipi Rahman? Where are we finding you, and what is top of your mind as we speak?
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you, Laura. I'm Lipi Rahman from Bangladesh. I'm from southwestern part of Bangladesh that is called Bagirhat, Rampal, and it is also like Simi. It is the the heat wave is going on, and I'm also sweating now because my I had to turn off my fan. And yes, the gender-based violence and climate change is a big issue here, and also as I'm working for the land and property rights of women, it's related with climate change and its impact on women, violence against women. And I hope that I will be able to talk about it, that how is women's lives are impacted by the climate change. Thank you from my side.
And Amanda, you're joining us from Costa Rica, as I understand it.
Yes, hello
Who are you
everyone.
thinking about?
Thank you so much for joining today's forum. Well, I'm at Costa Rica right now, and what's crossing my mind right now is that we're supposed to be in summer, and it just started beginning to rain very heavily here. So climate change effects I'm looking at right now. So this is something I'm very worried about, and I know how much it can affect women. So I'm very excited to talk about this today.
So let's put some sort of flesh on the bones of the story. Coming to you, just coming back to you, Simi, you said, you're looking at a drought. You're looking at a crisis. Can you talk about what that actually looks like to you? What it means? I think you actually said also flooding. Like, what does that mean to the people around you? What would we see if we were walking your streets and fields today?
Okay, if you were to walk around in Karachi, which is the world's seventh largest city, what you would see right now is that you could actually see the heat coming up from the concrete. Okay, because we have destroyed whatever little green cover we had, and whatever indigenous trees we had and indigenous vegetation, we are trying to replace it with plants from other parts of the world that are entirely unsuited for this area. They use up the little water we have. This is a very arid land. So if you would walk around the city, you don't see a lot of homeless people here, fortunately, and because of the philanthropy that happens, people don't go hungry. But nonetheless, what you will see are old people who are really suffering. People are getting sick, and the hospitals are absolutely full of people with heat strokes and similar ailments. Karachi and Pakistan as a whole is a climate change hotspot. And given this situation, and given the poverty in parts of my country, large parts of my country, the whole effect is exacerbated. And then the impact of that is felt mostly by women. There is feminization of poverty on the one hand, and then when floods happen, when droughts happen, and when populations are displaced, when there are earthquakes or there are other very catastrophic events, they get pushed into cities or they get pushed into camps. And where there isn't the protection of men, especially in families where the men are lost, then those women and girls are very vulnerable. I have seen this in all the catastrophic events where I've been part of emergency relief. That not only are the women sidelined, that's one angle, but they are actually on the receiving end of the perpetration of crimes, which may be rape, harassment, even murder, because it is felt by largely the men that the laws that exist here are not sufficient to criminalize what they do or to hold them accountable in this emergency situation where people's attention is much more on food and water and and on shelter and on medical supplies. So
I'm
in
I'm
this
sh I'm sure
situation,
if we could see you, Lippy, in this moment, you would be nodding in agreement, relating to some of what you're
yeah.
hearing here. Is there anything you would add to the picture specifically from Bangladesh, Lippy? We need your
Lippy, we
mic
can't
on.
hear you. You're muted.
Sorry. Yes, Laura. As Simi said that yeah, the scenario has changed for the climate change, but the area from I'm actually belong to, that this place was was like very green, and it was soothing. But day by day, the also that for the climate change and for the man-made actually climate change, it's all gone now. It's becoming like a desert kind of, because we are living nearby the largest mangrove forest. But the commercialization of traditional fishing, and the public and private land investments all are taking away the greenery. And also people are losing, for the climate change, people are losing their lands, and also their traditional job. And we are already talking about the climate change and its impact. We all know, we mostly talked, and we are all more or less aware of the sea level rising, increasing of temperature, and extreme weather events such as floods, droughts, and storms, and the increased spread of diseases. But we are actually not talking that much about girls and women. Women and girls are faced different from the that what is actually happening to them for this climate change. They are facing the different forms of gender-based violence also for this climate change actually. And we know that globally 1 in 3 women are survivors of various forms of gender-based violence, and all the major part of this for the climate change, and that I'm seeing from my area actually.
So whether we're
Yes.
talking urban areas or rural areas, we're looking at exacerbated impact of the climate crisis itself, as felt by women and girls, impunity, extra impunity for abusers, and as always, a kind of struggle even for attention to this issue. And I want to bring to you into that picture, Amanda, and specifically to talk a little bit about the particularly vulnerable women that you work with. The groups perhaps that we forget in that category of women and girls, migrants, people with disabilities, and others.
Yes, of course. Well, something that we're very worried about here in Central America in general is that we are creating less of zero point 0.5 of the greenhouses emissions, but we're going to be the more affected by climate change. And why does worry? Because women are the one who's going to be more affected. Women have 14% more chances to die and being affected by natural disasters. And that in a region like Central America, like in my country, is something we very worry about. Right now, it's raining a lot here at my country, in Costa Rica, and it's going to affect in a lot of ways. The past week, we have seen families that lost their houses. We have seen women that have been displaced out of their houses, people that live very near the rivers, so they get affected very easily. And that's something that is very worried about. What we actually do is that we work with women so they can empower themselves. They can be decision making people. Because that's something that's very important to talk about. When we are talking about climate change, we need to talk about justice, first of all, so everyone can have access to the same opportunities, can live in equity. But also, we need to talk about women in decision making positions because it's vital to have persons that believe in science, that believe in climate change, that believe in gender issues, and that actually work for this. So, this is what we're actually focused on. We know the effects of climate change are already here. We're seeing them, we live with them every single day, and we're trying to act to contrast them in any way we can.
And that brings me back to Lippy again. I mean, your work is focused, in a sense, on empowerment too, in terms of access to and control over bodies of water and land. Why is that such a big issue where you are? Can you just remind us? And what does your work look like? Maybe there's a story you want to tell.
Yes, you were right. That we from the beginning of my organization that we are working to establish the women's inheritance property rights, or the property rights of and water bodies rights, because we know that if actually women are inherited, there are some laws and also some religions that women are getting the property, but still for the patriarchal mindset, and for not empowering them and not aware of their rights, the women are not getting their fair share. And we think that this is important to get the property rights, because if you have this, this is actually a resource for a women, and it will make them empowered, and they will have, as Amanda said, that they will have the decision making power, because she can use this lands, piece of land to, she can sell it, or she can use it, and she can earn her income through this property, and it is also, her rights actually, and she could feel independent, and it could make them. That's why we are working to, mobilize women groups from the villages, and to aware them, to educate them about their land rights, about their water bodies rights, and how to keep them, in a safe way, because they don't know, because they don't have that much access to go out or to the offices, and that's how we are actually educate them about how to keep their lands, with what proper documents, and what, which office they should go. This way we are actually providing training for this 6 years and more than 6 years, and now we have 44 groups with 1423 women are the members of our groups, and they actually right now, because yesterday we have also done that some women got their lands in their names, because this is a very difficult procedures, and it is sometimes scary. Actually, they are afraid to go to the offices, because sometimes they are being harassed, because male, as patriarchal society, male officers sometimes do not hear them. Actually, they are not, will make them important. That's why we are actually support them, and we are supporting them with these things. That's how we are actually making them empowered and help them to, make their decision.
Simi, do you have evidence, or can you just talk to it? I mean, we know that violence against women happens at every class in every part of the world. Doesn't only happen in most vulnerable women. Happens with women in power as well. But what can you tell us about that relationship between having access to property, having access to water bodies, having access to a voice in government, perhaps a voice even in public safety design implementation, and the intersection of women's experience vis-a-vis violence, gender-based violence? Is there data on that that can help us kind of wrap our head around it?
Well, I have worked in about 50 countries in different capacities, and I think that finding authentic data is still a problem. It's still a problem because a lot of the research is still done by men. Okay, and the kind of questions that are posed are not such that they bring out the horrendousness of the problem. But the studies that I have seen, including many in Pakistan, they will tell you clearly that huge proportions of women, sometimes if we talk to college girls, it could be as much as more than half of them. And different studies in Pakistan have come up with slightly different proportion. And the same is in India and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and many other countries. But there is, if you take a range, depending on the kind of violence that we are addressing, you will see sometimes half, sometimes, two-thirds, sometimes three-quarters of women who will say that they have faced that kind of harassment and that kind of, attacks. What we need to understand is that toxic masculinity has just pervaded our whole discourse,
Yeah.
even on violence against women, so that even women who are part of that discourse, are so marginalized, because the men decide that they're all gender experts as well, and that they can speak on it, and because they are in leadership positions, that becomes a problem. So if I can take one more minute, I'd just like to say that institutions, whether they are justice institutions and law and order institutions, they help the perpetrators, to escape. We've just seen what has happened in the Johnny Depp case. So this is not something that is only in underdeveloped or developing countries. And then because there is a lot of pointing out of blame for the victims, and that has to be seen in the context of how women are still considered to be either property or repositories of family's honor. And there is documentation on this. If you talk to men and women in families, you can extract, and studies have extracted. I've been part of several of those studies, that how the same question is interpreted so differently by men and
Mhm.
women in the same family. So, really, who you talk to has a lot of impact on the kind of data that you get. And when you speak to women, you will find that many of them will be saying things like, oh, we are not consulted in decision making, or we have faced harassment from family members, or the family members, hide it. They conspire to hide the kind of rape threats or even rape or harassment or
So,
sexual harassment that they have faced.
so add the
That's well
climate crisis
documented.
to your picture, Simi. Add the climate crisis, because what you alluded to earlier was there are people, and you just described a whole bunch of them who maybe didn't take gender-based violence all that seriously in the first place, and now are saying, well, and we can't worry about this because the waters are rising,
Absolutely.
and the temperatures
Absolutely.
are
So,
soaring.
so
So
everything is exacerbated in an emergency situation. So with the climate change happening, people losing their job, you lock, and then we saw in COVID that when families were locked in, violence against women increased. And this is documented. And it increased because the guys and the husbands and the brothers who were at home in a situation where they weren't able to earn, and that men's image of themselves is tied so much to the fact that they can be bread earners, they take it out on the women and children. So that's a factor which I think has been documented extensively across the globe. So it should make us work and develop policies and strategies in terms of how we deal with the huge numbers of people who are going to now continue to be affected, and new groups of people are going to be affected by climate change. I don't think we are ready for that, and I don't think we have learned anything from these studies in terms of making better policies.
Amanda, coming back to you, I mean, are there reliable data sources covering Latin America at least?
I'm sorry, what?
Are there reliable data sources, sources of reliable statistics, information, data-based reporting covering Latin America, at least related to this relationship between gender-based violence and climate change?
That's actually a huge problem in our region. Costa Rica and the entire region doesn't have data. So we usually work with frameworks of global information, and that's very complicated because it's not the same in every single part of the world. So we know in the region, if you're between 25 and 34 years old, it's more likely you're going to be on poverty, and of course, that's going to affect you in climate change. And this data, I'm just saying, it only applies to women. So we know little things and we start like to put them together like in a puzzle. So we start to have like a bigger picture, but we don't have data. And that's something that is really worry about because we don't know information. And just as Simi is saying, we don't have policies. And the policies that are being making are not usually doing with the data and the information that we need to. It's very complicated. We need more women in these files to work and put this information more focus on gender focus. So this is something we really worry about, and we really expect people who are in decision making positions can understand that every single decision they are making, it must be provided with data information and gender focused information.
And I fear I know the answer to this question, but at this very same period, the powerful oil, gas, and energy companies that have helped to warm the planet are getting richer during the pandemic and in this moment of transition and war. Um,
Yeah.
are any of of them contributing anything positive to the research, analysis, documentation, or simply education around this issue? Back to you, Amanda.
No, we don't have anything. We don't
I
have
figured that was going to
anything.
be the
Yeah.
answer.
And actually, that's a huge problem right now. We have this huge problem with the gas, like in globally thing, and it's again affecting more women. The bus routes are like starting to go slower. We're having a lot of buses that are going out of business because they cannot provide like the gasoline for this to function. And women are starting to have to walk miles and miles and miles to get to their works, to get to their places, and it's very complicated because this is something that is truly affecting and no one is doing anything. And here in Costa Rica, the oil companies are just not even like saying anything, they're not providing anything, and it's very infuriating.
All right. So we've talked a little bit about the local. We've talked a little bit about public and private. There is a global body, international conferences have been held. We're talking the United Nations, the COP series. Um, what was the nature of the conversation at the most recent Conference of Parties on Climate Change in Glasgow last year, COP26, as it relates to violence against women and its relationship to climate change? I don't know if any of you were actually there, but I'm just going to ask you, was this matter addressed in that forum? Let me start with you, Lipi.
Yes. Yeah. In 2000 COP22, I actually did not take part any of this session. But in CSW, there I have taken part four of the sessions by four of the international organization,
The
and
Conference on the
there.
Status of Women.
Yes, and we have talked about that. We were actually given opportunity to talk about the climate change and violence against issues and what is happening at the field level. That's why I'm from the field. I'm working at the field level, that grassroots level. That I had that opportunity to talk about actually.
All right, so you're allowed to talk about climate at the Women's Conference. What about women at the Climate Conference? Simi.
What I want to say is that Salimul Haq from Bangladesh is a hero of mine. Okay, because he has been going on and he's attended every COP that's happened, and he's been going on and on about the loss and damage fund and compensation to those countries who have not contributed to global warming, but are very much impacted. All of Africa, I think, has contributed less than 4%. But in Glasgow, they backed off. The developed countries backed off from doing this. And what we must understand is that if we want to make those global changes, those countries that have contributed and continue to contribute to global warming and in destroying Earth's environment, then they must stop what they are doing. Right now, we are saying that we have a window of just 2 or 3 years when we have to stop extracting fossil fuels, and we have to really change the way we work on that. So even on loss and damage, they couldn't agree. So connecting violence against women to climate change is we are way off. I don't think that was addressed. I wasn't there, so I'm sure it was addressed on the margins, and there were a lot of people who were protesting, and they brought up these things. But in Egypt, when it's going to happen, the loss and damage fund is going to come up again, and I think that within that we need to do gender mainstreaming within the idea of the loss and damage fund, because it is women who have borne the brunt. They are the ones who are responsible for food and livelihood security of food, water, and livelihood security of the home. And they are the ones who look after old people and children. And they are the ones who have to really work the asses off, to keep that economy going. And nobody's talking to them. And I think the only way for us to address this is to build women's leadership in the sector so that women can bring up these causes. Because if we depend on men to do so, they are not going to do so, because they do not believe in this. They do not wish to believe in this.
So let me ask you, while we're talking about causes, Simi, sticking
Sorry?
with you, while we're talking about causes, and I hope this isn't
Yeah.
taking us off topic, but we've talked about how climate change, climate crisis is exacerbating violence against women and girls. Is there a root cause that is common? Here, when you talk to indigenous women, they talk about the principle of dominion that came with colonialism to the United States. And they say it was this principle, this attitude of dominion over land, over property, over women, and resources, including human resources, that sort of got itself embedded so early in our society, in our culture, that we have to do a major evacuation, extraction, sort of archaeological dig to remove it. Would you agree that there's a common source perhaps to violence against women and violence against the planet, and would focusing on that be a helpful way for us to bring these issues together?
Should I respond to that?
Simi, yes.
Okay. I think there is a common cause, and that common cause lies in the way that men see themselves as the repository of power, and how society and its institutions contribute to that. So the men who are in power then feel that they are able to act in ways that they wish, and there isn't a societal consensus on how that is to be stopped. And I think that the colonial enterprise really contributed to that, because the commonality of land ownership and societal setup was changed very drastically to private ownership, and to running and maintaining the natural base, the natural resources base, in a way that that also succumbed to privatization. Now, given that situation, that is going to take a long time to change those systems.
Mm.
And if we are to change those systems, then women have to be in leadership positions and their voices have to be heard. Because the way history is written, because it is largely written by men, we get the impression that women were always in a very subordinate position. And then when they are in a subordinate position, then other people can decide what is to be done with them. So that rewriting of history is already taking place. There are many feminists who are writing that, and they're reinterpreting uh, all of that. So the common cause, in my view, is the fact that societies have empowered and continue to empower men to
Mm.
behave in certain ways and to interpret data and to make policies in a way that ensures that women's subjugation continues. So
So,
I
so
feel that is the root cause.
gender-based power might be at the root of the problem. Power, attitudes, sense of
Perhaps.
entitlement.
Yeah.
Amanda, do we have the tools to reverse that process?
I think the key is education, and that's something that we everyone knows. Education is the key for change. We need to work with younger people, and that's something we're actually doing at our organization. We have a program called Soy Valentía, or I am brave in English. And what we do is work with teenage girls, specifically with women, so they can understand more about like how the world works, how they can develop their leadership, how can they impact their communities, and this is what we have been doing. But just as Simi said, we know there's a huge gap between the education women are receiving and the education men have right now. So we are doing this very brave generation of women who are like educating themselves to be very good leaders, to do huge impacts and changes. And we're not doing like a bit the same with men, talking about toxic masculinities, how they can have like a wider approach about gender issues, how violence also affects them, and all these little things. So what we are seeing is that we're having like this conflict between all these women, all these teenagers, in my case for the organization, having like this encounter with men of their same ages who are still very sexist. So they are ready to take leadership roles, they're ready to change their communities, and they find these people, all these men, and they're like, no, you cannot do
Mm.
this because you're a woman, you're a
Mm.
young woman. So this is something we're actually very worried about. Just as Simi said, it's important to have an education that is equal to everyone, so everyone can understand that violence is not only a topic of women, it's a topic that affects everyone.
So that takes me to your work, Lippy. You described the many groups that you work with and the level at which you work, very locally, very face to face, human to human. Can you just describe a project that you're particularly proud of and its impact, and did it have any impact on the men in the society and in a positive way?
Yes, Laura, there are some, because we are engaging, as Amanda and Simi says, that the mindset of the, I'm again and again saying the patriarchal mindset is the one cause. Yes, we are engaging men and boys too in our work. We are actually having conversation with them, having regular meeting with them, and there is a project that also the land project, that we land women landers project, that in this project we are actually having the young youth clubs, that is with the young girls and boys who actually can talk to each other and actually to change their mindset, because we think that if we can actually work with them when they're young, they can they are learning from their family members. That's why we need to change their mindset to. Also, we are engaging the school. We are going to schools here, that boys school and girls school, to talk about these issues, gender based violence. And because here are some young men, we have seen that they don't have any works, and women are going to the jobs or to the school or institutions, then that time they are being harassed by these boys or men. And that's why we are actually engaging in our work, and we have seen,
So,
yeah,
so
there
what
are
do
some
you what do you
changes.
What do you say, Lippy, when you say engaging? I mean, I wish I could be a fly on the wall to hear one of those conversations. How do you do it? What do you actually talk about there at the Land Project?
Yes, we are actually talking about them. Initially, when I need to actually a little bit make more extra to talk, because when we actually initially talking to them and we are sitting with them in their courtyard, that time the men actually were not agreed, or sometimes the women were not able allowed to talk to us. But slowly actually we have started talking to the local men, and we are the men. There are some clubs and there are some tea shops that men actually spend that time. We have started talking to them, and they actually realized something at that and but slowly, as we are working for 6 years, and we have engaged some when we actually succeed to with some documentation for with the women landers, and get the land for when a husband actually sees that his wife's lands are secured, that time he is happy. Also, it is a mindset. You need to keep on going to talk to them. And I think in this case we are actually successful in that way, that because we can engage some men and boys and they can realize. And also we are talking to the officials, the land officials, and the local stakeholders. Now they are actually talking, the journalists are writing the articles, and also the officials are very their behavior changed. That's why I can say that yes, we are succeed in this union,
So
because
do
we are
you
working in
say
the 4 unions. Yes, thank you.
so do
Sorry.
you say we want to talk about climate change, or do you say we want to talk about gender-based violence? Or do you say neither
Yeah,
of the above, we want to buy you tea?
because climate change and gender-based violence are very related. Because of the I have seen that for the climate change, women are actually the men are actually leaving the village for working to another place, to the urban, and the women are leaving behind with their children. She has now both double burden. She sometimes the husband do not come back, and also she do not have that much access to work labor force. And when she get the job, she actually being harassed in the workplace, and she is getting less wages, or minimum wages less than men. Also, they had to collect water because there is no drinking water available nearby. That's why they have to collect water far from the. And there, when they are collecting water, when they are returning, they are being harassed by the men, and sometimes uh, uh, a very big thing happened to them actually. And also, school dropout also is happening for this climate change, because they have to move place to place. And also, when there any disaster happened, they had to take shelter in the shelter house. There is no um, proper toilet, or washroom for women actually. This is, I think, yeah, it is very much related to
Mm.
climate change. Yes.
Simi, coming to you, I mean, there is another side to the picture of women, and that's the picture of women's power and women's mutual aid networks and women's impact on their society against all of the odds. And Pakistan has certainly seen its share of powerful women. Um, can you tell us a little bit about the degree to which you've seen change in your lifetime, and specifically at this intersection of climate change and violence against women? Is there a story you'd like to share? On my TV show, we say it's the place where the people who say it can't be done take a back seat to the people who are doing it. And we try to lift up models. We do lift up models every week of shifting power in the worlds of arts, politics, and economics. Um, is there such a story that you would like to lift up at this moment, perhaps as a
Yeah, yeah,
model?
yes, yes, certainly, certainly. There are, especially when we think about the great arts. But I'd like to begin by saying that these stories depend so much on who's behind them and who's doing it. So the government, very conservative, ministries of water and climate change and environment, they don't even acknowledge the problem. So getting onto the tables of decision making, those are stories in themselves. So one of the stories I'd like to share is that in one of the provinces of Pakistan, Sindh, which is my province, they started work on the provincial water policy. And then in all the discussions they were having, they're just guys, not a single woman. So somebody sent me those pictures. So I called them and I said, "Where are the women?" And of course, their response always is, but there are no women in this sector. And then they say, oh, you can come in. I said, no, it's not about me. It's about all those other young women out there, all who are trained. They said, no, no, there are no women. So we started a campaign. And every week we put up the profile of one fantastic woman in any one of these sectors. And we sent it to them and say, here, this is somebody you can use. Here, this is somebody you use. That campaign now has picked up in such a way that we want to soon bring out a book of 100 women in Pakistan who are in their own fields, who are experts. They're academics, they are farmers, they are NGO women, they are in citizens groups. So that is one example I wanted to share with you. But that really started a whole dialogue on women on the decision making table and how we get them there. Now, I just want to add that if there's a donor funded project, then all these boxes have to be ticked. Okay, so there appears to be much more happening on gender mainstreaming in these sectors, and also looking at violence and gender based violence. Then, if it's the corporate CSR, they want to stay away from what they call politics, and they're interested in greenwashing. So they don't even acknowledge that this problem of gender based violence exists in these sectors. Then you go to local philanthropy. The local philanthropy, they want to do specific things like helping the orphans and the widows, and providing food and maybe water. But they don't want to acknowledge that this, they don't acknowledge it. Then if you go to citizens groups, now citizens groups all over the world are active in these areas, but they are usually very poorly resourced. Okay, so their impact is limited. So how do we increase impact? That's what we want to see.
Mm.
Projects and programs and initiatives that will help women get into leadership position, and therefore will show a change. Because if we are saying we want to change policies and strategies, we won't do it until women are there, at least 50% of people who are making decisions or more. And we have
Would
seen in COVID how those countries and areas that were led by women, how that was different. And we also know that the first country to have half of parliamentarians that were women was an African country, and that countries like Pakistan, through reserved seats, was able to get something like 19-20% women long before some of the other developed countries did. And you're very right in saying, Laura, that some of these countries have had very powerful women. Why? Because until you get there, until you have that, you can't bring about. Look at
mm,
Benazir Bhutto, look at Indira Gandhi, look at Mrs. Bandra Naike, and look at the two strong ladies in Bangladesh. So this is, again, I'm saying it again, get women onto leadership positions, and then you'll see the change happening.
Liberia, Rwanda. Would an international treaty help? Simi.
100%. Because if you look at CEDAW, even though CEDAW had limited impact in many
The
countries, the
Convention
fact that
on the
CEDAW was there.
Elimination of Violence Against Women.
Hello?
I'm just spelling it out. The Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, right?
That's true.
CEDAW.
That CEDAW does not really address violence in a major way, but it was a great success at that time. And when countries signed up to that, activist groups like in countries like mine and many others, we had a stick with which to beat our governments and to say, okay, now you signed up for this. Are your laws in conformity, etc., etc. So I think having an international treaty, I'm all for it. I've worked for this treaty since I connected with it, and I really believe that this is something that we can do in a major way.
Amanda, would a treaty help your situation? And we also want to mention that we are taking questions, folks. So if you have questions, just post them there, I think in the YouTube chat or wherever else you've been invited to post them, and we will bring them to the attention of our panelists in about 8 minutes. Amanda.
Yes, totally. A new treaty will help a lot. We have here in our region, we have the CEDAW and we have Belém do Pará, and they're amazing. They have worked a lot, but it's time to have a new treaty. And it's very important to have this. And this process has been led by women who are incredibly amazing. I was part of a fellowship of every woman treaty called the Thousand Voices. When I met amazing activists, I understood the importance of this process, and of course, it made me realize that a new global treaty is more urgent than ever. We need to work collectively, like as a completely union. The climate change is something that's affecting us globally, and it's the same with violence. We need to work together. We cannot be working from sector and regions and countries. We need to start working more collectively. So yes, a global treaty will help 1000%.
Talk a bit about why you care about this so much, Amanda. What is this to you personally?
About gender violence and climate change, both of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Well, um, my country could basically disappear. But it's basically that, you know. When I talk about climate change, I understand many parts of my country, places I was raising on, could completely disappear because of the ocean rising right now. I understand and see how it's affecting farmers. I see how it's affecting a lot of regions. It's predicted that next year the people who are producing coffee are going to be like hugely affected by climate change. So I really care about this because I'm living it every single day. I wake up and I see how climate change is affecting my country, and I see how terrible it's become. And about gender violence, I do it because it's the same. Every day I wake up and I see how it's affecting me personally and my family and my friends and all the women in my life. I know this is going through like my skin per se somehow, and it's sad because I never saw anyone doing anything, and it was time to step up and be like, no, we have to take action on this. We have to start working on this. That's why I start working with climate change issues. That's why I start with gender issues, because it was time to do something, and I felt I needed to step up and be like, okay, I need to be part of a change to this.
And Lippy, thank you for that. The same question for you, Lippy. How did you start doing this work and why? Why you? Why this work?
Yes, because I have when I actually visited the field and the village, actually, yeah, I've seen my own eyes that how things are changing, how climate change are impact the people's lives, and especially to the women's lives, and how they are suffering. Because when I used to go to the villages, that the places I have seen that now this year, we are having the worst floods, and it is for the climate change. And I have seen that people are losing their homes for the river erosion, and people are becoming displaced, and women are having sufferings a lot. And also who are yes, the elderly women I have seen. And they are actually how that we are actually losing our producing that the rice and the other staple food that we used to do. Now we actually I can see the difference when I cannot express myself in that way, that I'm not that fluent in English. But when I see that it is changing every day in front of my eyes, that's why I think that it's very needed to work now. And Bangladesh is the seventh highest risk in the country, that we are actually the climate impact is very dangerous. We are in a very dangerous situation because sea level are rising, river erosion is happening, and also the flooding, and lots of things are happening, and people's lives are miserable. And also as I'm working with the women rights issues and girls rights, that I'm seeing this, that how this is actually being worse in their lives and how they are suffering. Yeah, that's right.
Simi, we have you back. Why you? Why this work? Why is this personal for you?
I joined the women's movement in Pakistan when I was a teenager. And 1980s was a time when the women's movement, stood up against a dictator, and then that also seeped into the democracy movement. So it was a really important defining moment in Pakistan's history. So, that continued. And I'm a geographer. So obviously, concerns with water, environment, climate change is part of what I do. And then a lot of focus on poverty alleviation. So I have worked in all these sectors together. So for me, I've been part of many global movements to do with women's rights, and a regional movement, and of course, very much in Pakistan as well. So when I met up with these wonderful lawyers from Harvard on the sidelines of the UN Women's Commission meeting in New York, I think it must have been 2014. So I just loved what they were going to do. So I just joined up with them, and quite apart from working on defining gender violence, we took a year or two to do that. I was one of the leads on that. I also co-chaired the steering committee for many years. The steering committee is now wound up, because there is now a more formal structure with a board and everything. And now, of course, I'm part of the coalition in South Asia, and we are trying to get countries to sign up to this and to take it to the UN and vote, etc. So, it is very personal because everywhere around me, I can see what is going on. It's with friends, it's with people around me, it's communities I work with, it's people in my office. This is just endless. And even my daughter, who's now 29, is also a huge advocate. So are my sons. It's personal because I tried to bring them up in exactly the same way, which is a tough call in everywhere, I guess. So yes, I take it very personally. I'm very passionate. I'm out on the streets when I have to be. I negotiate with government people when I have to do that. And like Amanda and Lipi, I believe that we have to engage at all levels at the same time. So you do what you have to do with communities, you work in the middle, and you keep banging the doors of the government, because eventually the governments have to take it to scale, which means that the laws have to be brought up to date as much as they can. And I've been lucky because I've had a chance to have hugely funded programs that I was able to lead and put the funds where they needed to go, whether it's women's shelters, whether it's commissions on human rights and on water and on women's rights. So I guess it has to be personal. We have to really feel it, and we have to feel the passion if we want to make the change, because then we won't be put off by all the people pushing you back.
Yeah.
That just inspire us to do more. And if we look at climate change and we're seeing it, as I started by saying, we're in the middle of a heat wave, everything is going to multiply. So our efforts have to multiply that many times in order to assist women and help them to cope with the mountain of abuse and harassment that's going to come their way in
It's a
this
lot. And that's one of the questions coming from YouTube to you, Amanda. Given how huge the challenge seems to be, the question is, how do you think that women can protect the climate and their own environment there in Latin America?
Mhm. I think this can be answered in three parts. First of all, we have to take action in our communities or in groups we feel very related to. We need to understand what's going on in our community, if something is happening and we need it to change immediately. After that, we need to take pressure to our representatives in political positions. We have to go and ask them to start making laws and projects in order to protect our environments. And lastly, especially this in Latin America is very urgent and important. We need to ask every single country to be added to that agreement of Escazu to protect the people who are activists for the environment. This is completely urgent. In our region, the activists of environment are dying and being killed. So we need this agreement to be protected about any kind of injustice of treatment and anything that can be done to anyone who's trying to protect the environment. So definitely join your community, start
Just lay
making
that out
impact.
for our audience just a little bit more. If they're not familiar, they may have heard of the assassination of Berta Cáceres, may be somewhat aware of the onslaught of violence, especially facing women leaders, indigenous women leaders on the climate front. What is the agreement, and what can we perhaps in the United States do to raise its impact?
Okay, the agreement is called Escazu Agreement. Is an agreement that is made to protect people who are taking care of the environment. It's basically the summary. What we can do to join this movement, first of all, ask the governments to join this agreement is very urgent. This is very similar to the Paris Agreement, but it's only dedicated for people who are taking care of the environment. So we need to take action and be calling our representatives and asking, do you already saw this? Do you already read it? How can we join? What can we do to understand this? And after that, we need to spread the word. We need to everyone to understand what's the Esquisse agreement and why it's so important, so they can understand the importance of our countries joining to them. This agreement was actually made in Costa Rica and we're not on it yet. And this is something that's very conflicted to everyone because here in Costa Rica, people are dying protecting our environment, and we don't have any kind of law or any kind of international agreement that can protect us from this.
So that goes back to the question of impunity and the difference international law could make if it was brought to the local level and implemented, or at least used as a point of leverage for local organizations. Is there such a movement where you are, Lipi, in Bangladesh? And what are some of the dangers that your activists are facing specifically related to this? Are they at increased risk of violence? You're still you're muted.
Sorry, because yeah, recently I have talked about the defenders that climate change defenders that we are working with. In they have some we have some volunteers who actually working on the that we are working from the group, and they are in the community as they are being harassed because there are some it is a conservative area, and when they are the female are out and working and they are stopped, and there are some social pressure, there are some they are threatened, and also that parents are being they are complaining to the parents that why they are they are talking in front of the people. And yes, also this rumors and also the psychological pressure to them. And recently some of our volunteers, two of our volunteers are forced marriage because when they were working with us, their parents did not take that pressure from the society community that much. And these things are happening because of social and physical or psychological pressure is going on. And yes.
Well, I want to thank all of you for participating in this conversation today. And I think throw it for a last word to each of you. We've got about 4 minutes. I often ask on my program before we close, what do you think will be the story that the future tells of this moment? And you can catch my show on public television or on YouTube. We're actually global if you want it. But the answers are often very powerful. The story that the future will tell of this moment, what do you think it will be, Lippy?
Laura, can you repeat it because I could not hear you well?
Oh, my question was,
Sorry.
what do you think is the story? What will the future say about what we did right here, right now?
Yeah, I think at least that we are talking, and as a grassroots level worker, as a grassroots level activist, that I got this opportunity to talk in this international platform. And yeah, it's a good sign because I think women leaders from grassroots level are coming up and talking and about these women rights issues and climate change. And this is, I think, if we are united, as Amanda said, that women need to come up more to talk about this. Yes, that there will be some change.
So the future may say
I'm
that at least
hopeful.
we
Yes.
started connecting these issues and hearing from people at the grassroots. Simi, what do you think the future will tell of this moment?
Okay, I think when we look back at this moment, what will really stand out is that finally, we have made the connection between women's right and this earth. Okay, and finally bringing these two strands together, I think is key, because I believe that this century women will make the change. They are already doing so, and I think that is the defining moment, because otherwise these two were taken separately. There was a whole women's rights movement that was going in one direction, and which includes violence against women, and there was something else which was about saving the earth, about nature based solutions, about living at ease, about living within the limits of the resources of earth. I think women know how to live with limited resources. They have always done it. And if they become leaders and they have a sane policy, I think there is enough to go around for everyone. Women would take the decision of saying from tomorrow, nobody is extracting any more fossil fuels. Women would have the courage to do that if they were in positions of power. I hope they will have that courage and they will show it very soon.
Some women would, especially if pressured by enough organizations. I'm hearing the importance of bringing people and planet and education and policy and passion all together. Amanda, final thought from you. What do you think will be the story the future tells of now?
Well, first of all, I hope we do the right decision right now. Right now is the point we need to take decisions. So first of all, I really hope we as a globe and a humanity we can understand the importance of the decision we have to make and the actions we have to take. And after that, the only thing I can imagine is a world where we can have more women in power decisions, making decision positions, a world where we don't have to be worried about floodings and hurricanes and how people are dying from this. And overall, and this is very important, I really picture a world where women in decision making positions are completely aligned to science, human rights, and especially due to the importance of eradicating violence against women. Because it's vital. We need to do it. Just as climate change is just so urgent right now, eradicating violence against women and girls are urgent right now. So yeah, that's what I picture for a future.
Thank you so much. So I want to just send a huge appreciation again to the organizers of today's roundtable and remind you that it is part of a series being co-hosted by the Every Woman Treaty and the Carter Center. And today we heard just there from Amanda Arroyo-Cabezas, and before her from Simi, Kamal, and Lipi, Rahman. I'm Laura Flanders from the Laura Flanders Show. Thank you so much for joining us, for your questions, and may the conversation keep going. If we don't take seriously violence against women, us, and people like us, how are we ever going to take seriously the violence against our precious planet? And if we don't take that seriously, we ain't none of us going to be here for the next roundtable series like this. So thank you so much, all of you. We really appreciate your participation today. And for some of you now, you get to go to bed. For the rest of us, we have a day of work ahead of us. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
Laura.
Laura. Yes. Yes, good.